Harsh words at the state fair don't seem to bring a state budget agreement any closer. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. It was that wild kind of summer week at the state fair where we have Governor's Day, which was Republican this year, and Democrat Day. Lots of speeches and still a state budget crisis. Here to talk about it with me today and share with you, Hannah Meisel is back, reporter with WILL Radio in Urbana.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. Patrick Yeagle is here, reporter for Illinois Times here in Springfield.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, state fair political days. One of us at the table has been to way too many of these, but that's okay. It's always fun to see what gets produced. Republicans were very happy this week that for the first time in 12 years, Governor's Day was the Republicans' day. It was on the Wednesday in the middle of State Fair week. Giant flag, which actually was the backdrop on both days, but they reconfigured the stage. It was a nice presentation, politically speaking, and for TV cameras and all. A lot of Republicans showed up and filled the seats for Governor Rauner, who gave a real pep talk. And there were also like some hundreds of demonstrators who were kept across the street by yellow tape who were saying, you know, we don't like the governor's cuts. The governor says the cuts are really not my fault. They're the Speaker Madigan's fault because the state government budget agreement is still not made. But the governor also said things like, when he talked to reporters, Mike Madigan has ice water in his veins. And when he spoke, both at a morning event in a hotel and at the fairgrounds, the governor talked about the cronyism and the patronage and all the terrible things the Democrats have done to the state. And Mike Madigan in particular, he talked mostly about, is this productive because we still don't have a state budget?
It really doubles down on the narrative that he's been pushing since he became a candidate, which is that he was going to run for reform against the so-called Chicago machine, which he and many others believe that Speaker Madigan controls. Is it productive? No. Is any of the politicking productive? Unless you involve real voters with, you know, who have real pressure points, who put votes in jeopardy, I would say no.
Well, we'll see. I know Speaker Madigan talked to some reporters before Democrat Day morning brunch, the County Chairman's Association, and just said, you know, when asked about the name calling, et cetera, he said it's just not helpful to the process. And they still don't have a budget agreement. Patrick, any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, we were talking beforehand about the crowds at the state fair. You know, the Republicans were pretty full, but the Democrats were a little bit sparse this year. And I think that kind of reflects that Democrats are tired and kind of wary of being seen with, you know, the top dog, Mike Madigan. And I think that, you know, Madigan recognizes that he's playing the long game. He always plays the long game. And one thing we know about him is that he always wins the long game. You know, nobody that I can recall has bested him, you know, in his kind of machinations, if that's the right word.
Yeah. I would say, and perhaps it's funny because I tweeted out a picture. They had many speakers in the afternoon event on Democrat Day, and some of the state officials talked and then left, and there were a bunch of people from some sort of home and aid society in Chicago who were just watching and then left. A lot of empty seats, but they also let like at least 4 or 5 people affected by state budget cuts have the stage for a while and talk. Vicki Mosley is a former state representative from Springfield, and her 19-year-old son is autistic. They spoke about the cuts in programs to autism that had been imposed earlier and may be imposed again. Things like that. There was a guy who goes to college in Springfield, Robert Morris University, and has gotten monetary award program grants, $20,000 helping through school. Those are in jeopardy now too. So the Democrats had all of these speakers and many candidates, and by the time, you know, the program of an hour or more was done, many people were gone, and it looked pretty funny. And the Republicans even put out a a press release showing the empty seats. I will say, however, I'm not sure I agree on the Madigan thing. The outdoor thing in recent years has gotten less important to the Democrats. The morning brunch is great. They had like 1,200 people or more. They filled the whole ballroom at the Hilton. Speaker Madigan gave a rousing speech. You know, there were standing ovations for lots of people. So you have to pick your spots. It did not serve the Democrats well that people focus on what happened each afternoon.
Right.
The Republican event in the morning is just their state central committee and their county chair, so it's a much smaller event and much less hype. But the main Republican speeches were clearly their afternoon. The main Democratic speeches were clearly their morning. Anyway, Speaker Madigan in the morning in particular gave like a 4.5-5 minute speech talking about we're in an epic battle with Governor Rauner, and we were united in that epic battle. And I think they kind of are. He says that Bruce Rauner's turnaround agenda which would erode union rights, at least potentially across the state in communities, would lower wages and standard of living across the state the way that the Democrats see it, and certainly labor unions are aligned with them, and many people in the room, and we're sponsoring the events and such. So I'm not sure where the resolution yet comes if Bruce Rauner wants structural reform, which is, and all of this stuff which he says has to get done, including term limits, which I'm not sure how solves the state budget, remap reform, which this year I'm not sure how solves the state budget, but he wants things like that, plus lawsuit reform and a better business climate, but also the ability of local governments not to pay prevailing wage if they don't want to, and not to collectively bargain on everything with their employees if they don't want to. And the Democrats are not going to let that happen, I don't think. Is there a resolution yet?
90%, you have to remember, 90% of the state budget is now being paid out, whether that's by existing state law or court orders or consent decrees. 90%, that is mind-blowing, quite frankly. And if we keep going like this, we're going to exceed the revenue that we're taking in this year. And then we're going to have to start paying places.
Oh, the penalties for
the interest.
Right. Interest. And then the backlog of bills is going to balloon way up again. We had it down from, $10 billion a couple of years ago, and we had it down, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4.
5, yeah. Of course, that's when we had 5% income tax, which fell off January 1st.
Exactly.
The legislature let it fall off. Bruce Rauner wanted it to fall off. He says he won't allow new revenue until the legislature passes reforms, but the Democrats think his reforms have nothing to do with the budget and would hurt the state.
So I think there are two opportunities here for compromise. I think we have seen the Senate President John Cullerton been able to move maybe a little bit on a property tax freeze, would be for 2 years. The governor, of course, he has what some Democrats are calling a poison pill in there, which would eliminate prevailing wage, which are
or at least allow local communities not to pay prevailing wage. The way the governor always puts it, well, if they want to pay it, fine. If they want to pay those high prices, fine. But they don't have to.
Right. But
they shouldn't have to.
That could definitely be a way forward. We've seen the Senate president commit to that, it seems. A second way forward, because like we've talked about on the show many times, most of the pressure points are totally gone now. Unlike what most executives might do in Governor Rauner's position to inflame a situation to come to a compromise. He's actually let these pressure points be mitigated.
Well, he wanted state employees paid, and courts have now ordered them paid, which is really a big deal, because if so many state employees weren't being paid, then they would have to do something.
Right, and we've had, schools are now open. It's the end of August now. Oh my goodness.
How about that?
And several other things related to the state budget. The pressure points are gone.
Right.
But I think the only path forward now is we see CPS, Chicago Public Schools. They are on fire, basically. They are just...
Because they have pension payments to make. And
they have layoffs of, thousands coming or already have come. And, the last credit rating agency that matters has just downgraded them to junk status.
So
and
a solution for that may...
Right. So I think in January, that's when things really, really get bad for them. And I think that is the only path forward for compromise right now. That is the last pressure point. However, that could then double down on, if there's a solution made on the crux of CPS, it could double down on the narrative of, downstate Republicans or even Democrats who are, do good citizens, pay their taxes, they don't pay attention to Chicago, versus the Democratic Chicago machine. And that could just be really damaging.
Well, we'll see where it goes. And that, of course, talks about, you talk about no pressure points, but certainly the social service agencies that aren't getting paid all along, they certainly feel pressure, even though in the broader scheme, state employees are getting paid and schools are opening. But Patrick, you've written about that recently, the real impact of having no state budget.
Right. There's a large segment of our society that relies on state services, in-home care, child care subsidies.
So for the elderly, for the disabled?
Absolutely. Mental health care. There's just so many things that we, those of us I don't want to say normal because that kind of...
but just everyday life, we don't see these
in everyday
things.
life, exactly. We don't see those things in action. And when they disappear, the social safety net starts to crumble, and it has very scary ramifications for the rest of us that don't necessarily rely on those things directly, but that benefit from them, in that we, fewer people on welfare, for example, means we pay less on welfare. These programs are meant to help people live independently and avoid welfare. So, not getting this budget issue resolved basically is hurting everyone. Even if you're a state employee still getting paid, you're still getting hurt on the back end, the long-term effects.
Right. In the middle of all of, just having no budget, we also had, at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is July 1st, the contract with something like 38,000 state employees came to an end. The AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and the governor, in negotiations, if you believe the memos that come out from the union, wants to dramatically increase healthcare costs for employees and take away some other benefits, freeze their pay. I think it was for 4 years. Things that clearly are not going to be easily swallowed by the union, especially when the governor keeps talking about diminishing union power in other ways. So they had a month extension. Now they're apparently just operating on that contract. So the AFSCME went to the legislature, which is dominated by Democrats, and had them pass a bill that said there can be no lockout, which the governor says he won't do anyway, but had threatened to shut down during the campaign. And there can be no strike for all these state employees. And either side, if they declare an impasse, can have their contract go to an arbitrator. The governor calls this the worst bill he's ever seen, attack on taxpayers, because it would, let me do my job, he says, because this would give an arbitrator who is not elected but appointed in the ability to determine what state employees, thousands and thousands of them, will get paid and what their benefits are. And they have been working very hard from the Rauner administration to stop an override of that. But the Senate came in this week and did override it, even on the same day that the governor had told reporters, well, if John Cullerton, the president of the Senate, lets this be overridden, that shows he's under the thumb of Mike Madigan. Cullerton made it very clear at Democrat Day he's not under the thumb of, or he said, I'm willing to work with Governor Rauner, but I don't work for Governor Rauner, which got a big applause line at the hotel. And now the House, within a couple weeks, is going to vote to override. And Speaker Madigan says they have the votes, but I think the vote isn't scheduled maybe for another couple weeks. So any prognostication of what that means, it seems like, we're still fighting here.
I think it's pretty likely that they'll override the veto. I mean, the things that Governor Rauner wants from unions, his asks are just anathema to what Democrats stand for, and I don't think that they're ever going to let him have those things. And this, the binding arbitration bill is kind of a perfect example. The Republicans like to say, oh, well, the arbitrators are unelected and they always go for the union side. That's not actually true. We actually looked at some of those. We actually tallied up all of the decisions, and it's pretty much a 50-50 split. It's a little bit.
And that's where arbitrators are used in state government already. And I guess, and I know they argue the Democrats do that already. Prison workers, correctional workers, and I guess local police and fire have provisions like this to avoid strikes already.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. It's clearly a real hot button issue for the Rauner camp, and they clearly lost one in the Senate. Oddly, or interestingly, there was only one Republican that voted to override, and it was Sam McCann, who is from the Carlinville area and represents part of Springfield, and who is up for election this coming year. So it's it's kind of interesting. We'll see what happens with.
I think he knows where his bread is buttered.
He did say, what he hears from his workers is, give us this bill to basically probably to protect us from what we think the governor wants to do to our contract. So.
One thing I do want to get in before we move on from the state fair is that the governor on Republican Day said that within 8 years he would like to see Republican rule in both the House and Senate. And I think that the next day Democrats came out and they said, we're more united and fired up than ever because of Governor Rauner. So again.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, it's interesting. He said Governor Rauner also said one-party rule is bad, and at their breakfast he compared one-party rule to Cuba and the old Soviet Union. But then he also said, I want Republicans to have the governor's office and both houses.
Funny how that works.
I guess it depends who's ruling.
Right.
Monetary award program grants, as I said, they've been on the chopping block. The Senate, when they were in this last week, also voted to approve $373 million for that program, which helps college students pay for tuition and things, 130,000 students. The governor's office at this point says that the governor's opposed to it because it's part of an unbalanced budget plan, and he wants a real budget plan with reforms. So the House, we'll see where that goes. We are also seeing at Democrat Day, while people might be united in not liking some of the things the governor's saying, turns out there are at least 4 people looking to run for U.S. Senate against Mark Kirk, the incumbent Republican. Tammy Duckworth has the endorsement, and she's a congressperson. She was the one who was an Army pilot and lost both legs at war when her helicopter was shot down, and she's in Congress now, and she used to run the Illinois Veterans Department and then worked for the feds before getting elected to Congress. Senator Durbin from Springfield is for her. There's a state senator, Napoleon Harris, former football player in the NFL, who is running. Andrea Zopp, former head of the Chicago Urban League, is running and gave a long speech and basically announced at the fair, although people knew she was running, and got some support, including from Kwame Raoul, who's a state senator from Chicago. And let's see, there was another.
Richard Boykin?
Richard Boykin, thank you, who is on the Cook County board. He's a Cook County commissioner and a lawyer, and says he might run. So is this good or bad for Democrats that there are all these people running for this office at this time?
I think ultimately Tammy Duckworth will win out because she has the support of DC, and that's where the money is going to come from. The other 3 are virtually unknown outside of their own immediate vicinities. And Tammy Duckworth has had the name recognition for years now. But, like any other democratic process, it's good to discuss other ideas. But I think it's interesting that, we have known for a couple months now that Andrea Zopp was going to, run against Congresswoman Duckworth. But the other 2 are pretty late add-ons, and it's just interesting that they would want to jump into a race that seems so set already. Right,
and as Senator Kirk had been scheduled to be at the Republican Day at the State Fair, but then did not show up, and his people said he was getting a briefing on the Iran nuclear agreement. He's been a key opponent of that, and apparently he was getting more information that he could help sell other senators with. Any thoughts about that? Clearly there was some question as to why isn't Mark Kirk here, and why aren't people saying more about him when he's everybody's candidate for re-election on the Republican side.
I think, I don't know if I can speak to that a whole lot, but I think I can confidently say that when it comes down to, like you said, it's probably going to be Tammy Duckworth versus Mark Kirk. I think probably.
You guys should predict in my column. But
I think I'd probably have to give it to Tammy Duckworth. She has, they both have their military background, and at the time when Mark Kirk won that seat the first time, he kind of relied on that a lot to win that seat. Tammy Duckworth has not only that same military background, but a better story and the full support of DC. Whereas Mark Kirk's support, I think, has been kind of among his own party has been kind of tepid. They're glad he's there because he's a Republican.
Well, the governor is strongly for him, and,
sure.
a lot of Mark Kirk's former staff works for the governor now.
Sure.
And people in the party seem not to be too willing to take on the governor's team right now. So Mark Kirk is getting solid support as people talk. Other than the occasional blip.
Yeah,
I will
then it gets smoothed over.
I will say on the Democratic side that while Tammy Duckworth has the support of like the Democratic Senatorial Committee out of Washington, Cook County Democrats met in the last week, and they did not endorse in that race, so that left it open to Andrea Zopp and these other people. They did in the race for comptroller, which Leslie Munger is the appointed comptroller of the Republicans, and she's running for this year in 2016 to finish Judy Bart Topinka's term, to which she was appointed after Judy Bart Topinka's death. The Democrats have Chicago City Clerk Susana Mendoza, who is a former state representative from Chicago, and Daniel Biss of Evanston, a state senator who his profession was a math professor, I think, University of Chicago. And he is running, but Susana Mendoza got the nod of the Cook County Democrats. So any thoughts on that? Obviously, the Democrats have a couple of races to gin things up, and Daniel Biss says he will be staying in it. So we'll see where it goes, which is interesting. On a non-budget issue, there was a piece of legislation passed by the General Assembly that would ban what's called gay conversion therapy. So if you're under 18 and you're a patient of a therapist in Illinois, that therapist is not allowed to try to change your sexual orientation. This was opposed by some kind of religious groups, particularly religious right side of the spectrum groups, saying, who think people can be talked out of their gayness if they're wavering as a youth. But there have been some bad stories about people being put through this as children being, pushed into it by their parents. So thoughts on this? The governor signed it, which shows he is the one who ran on having no social agenda, but he did really side with the more progressive voices here, and Illinois joins, I think, New Jersey and California with laws like this.
I don't think the governor wants to fight this battle. I mean, almost 2 years ago now, it was pretty much settled in Illinois when the General Assembly passed same-sex marriage. And again, it's just not something that he would want to wade into. This bill has been in the works for at least 2 years now, I think. And lots of support from Democrats, of course, lots of support from the LGBT community, progressives, and even some support from the Republican side who have heard the stories of people who have gone through this therapy. And, this is where we most clearly see the nation's very, very rapidly changing views on being gay.
Yeah, it's the quickest social change I've seen in my career. Patrick, any further thoughts on that?
I don't know if I can add a whole lot to that other than that I think you're right that the governor didn't want to wade into that battle. He kind of saw the writing on the wall that, whether or not he favors it, it was already kind of done before he even took office. So anything, that he would do on that would probably any resistance he would put up would probably go against him. Right.
I should mention that I think it's the only congressional race in the country set for a Thursday of September 10th. I think that's a Thursday, but I know it's September 10th, where to replace Aaron Schock, there's a special election in the 18th Congressional District, from Peoria down to Bloomington, and I think, there's some of Bloomington and Springfield. Darren LaHood, state senator from Peoria, versus the Republican versus Rob Mellon, the Democrat from Quincy, who's a teacher and military reservist. And I think it's going to be a very low turnout, but everybody thinks this is a Republican district, and therefore LaHood, son of former U.S. Rep and Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood, will probably be the next member of Congress. But Rob Mellon, who has limited his spending to $150,000 with some do-gooder group, while LaHood has raised well over $1 million, and I think it might even be $2 million. you know, so is there any question how this will come out?
No, I think
no one says there is, and he speaks well.
It's Luhud's race to hello.
Mm-hmm.
It's his race to lose.
And he hasn't done so yet.
And he hasn't done so yet, but I'm still getting emails from Rob Mellon, so
right.
he's still in it.
And he did speak at the fair. It was just unfortunately at the end of a long program, so, but I listened. Also, and I think he had indicated this before, but Secretary of State Jesse White, who was a member of the Illinois House, and then he was Cook County Recorder of Deeds, and then he was elected Secretary of State in 1998, took office in 99, and has a couple times threatened not to run again, but said at the fair, you know, this is my last tour of duty. He used to be a jump out of airplanes, doing parachute jumps in the Army, I believe, and said this is his last tour of duty. And already, Steve Brown, spokesman for the Democrats, has said, well, I know there are a lot of people trying to talk Jesse into running again. Jesse White is 81. He still runs the Tumbler, Jesse White Tumblers, which is basically inner city youth, many, you know, who follow the rules and do these great gymnastics and are well loved everywhere and have helped with Jesse White's career, but he has helped them as well. Thousands and thousands of kids have gone through this program. Thoughts about Jesse?
He is one of the most well-loved Democrats in the state. Secretary of State isn't a very divisive position anyway in state government, and he's pretty well known. He's a former Cubs player. That's a fun fact.
Well, minor league.
Okay, but still.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's not running again after many years. I can't do that
it'll
right
be
now.
20, yeah.
Right. But he said this time you can take that promise to the bank.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. Now, and I must say that while you say it's not controversial, George Ryan found a little controversy in the Secretary of State's office, and others in the past have too. Paul Powell comes to mind. So if you handle it correctly, you stay out of trouble. Is this an opening for Republicans, or do we have any idea? Of course, this won't be till 2018, which is a non-presidential year. We'll kind of see how things go with the governor between now and then.
Quite a lot of stuff that can change between now and then, so we'll see.
Okay. With that, we will. Perhaps we should, I don't know if it's advocating too much to wish for a state budget solution shortly. We'll see what happens. Hannah Meisel, Patrick Yeagle, thanks for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. We'll keep an eye on it, and thank you. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.